Welcome to your news analysis here on Press TV with me, Narges Mobalaghi. Well, when Israel decided to resume settlement expansion on Sunday, it took the US brokered direct talks to breaking point. What we've seen since is a flurry of diplomatic activity as the US and the EU try and salvage negotiations. So far, though, it's not looking good. Here are the details on talks in disarray.
4 weeks after brokering the resumption of talks between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority, the U.S. Special Envoy is now shuttling between Jerusalem al-Quds and Ramallah in desperate efforts to salvage the talks. The talks now face collapse with the Israeli decision to end a 10-month partial freeze on settlement expansion. U.S. Special Envoy George Mitchell met with acting Palestinian Authority Chief Mahmoud Abbas for a second time in 24 hours on Friday. But the talks ended without a breakthrough. Reports say Abbas has once again said he will walk out of the talks if settlement activities continue. But the US has managed to buy some time. Abbas has said he will hold off a decision on the fate of the talks until the Arab League discusses the issue at a meeting in Cairo next week. US President Barack Obama has invested major political capital in the renewed talks, and he's left with little choice than to do all it takes to keep the two sides talking. Reports say Obama has even sent a letter to Israeli Premier Benjamin Netanyahu making generous offers in exchange for a 60-day extension of the moratorium. In the letter, Obama has apparently guaranteed the future sale of advanced missile systems and another squadron of F-35 advanced fighter aircraft to Israel. The proposal has reportedly been rejected by the Israeli side, and the US has denied the very existence of such a letter.
So, to ask if there can be settlements and talks, we're joined by author and Middle East affairs expert Dr. Saeb Shaath in Belfast, President of the Middle East Research Center, Richard Hellman in Washington, and Executive Director of If Americans Knew and President of the Council for National Interest, Alison Weir in Chicago. Weir, let me start with you. What is it exactly that you think the US and the EU are trying to lobby for now, after the settlements have resumed, that wasn't done before their expiration?
Well, the U.S. They're both lobbying ostensibly for a settlement freeze, a very partial moratorium. And the U.S. especially has been trying to push Israel to have another so-called moratorium or another so-called freeze. They have offered, by all reports, it appears that they're offering Netanyahu to even support a prolonged Israeli presence, as they call it, in the Jordan Valley, land that is clearly part of the Palestinian territories.
This issue over to Mr. Hellman. Of course, these concessions, let's call them, have been strongly denied by the United States. They're saying that there was no letter handed over to Benjamin Netanyahu. But do you think that there, in principle, could be this kind of flourish of concessions and negotiations going on now? And why didn't it happen before the settlement moratorium expired? Did the Americans think that Israel would bow under their pressure?
Well, I think that the Americans, that Prime Minister Netanyahu could restrain the settler parties in his coalition, and on the other hand, that perhaps Mahmoud Abbas could convince the Arab League on Monday, October 4th, to endorse his continuation in talks, even though there is not a settlement moratorium, but not deliver peace or security in the West Bank, much less in Gaza.
Shaath's comments in here as well. Mr. Hellman's talking about negotiations which would have to take place, what the Palestinians would get, what the Israelis would get. But the point is, right now, we might not even get to the table to discuss these ins and outs. Everything is on a knife edge right now. Do you think the deal breaker will be the Arab League? If they don't continue their support after their meeting, will everything fall flat?
The Palestinian Authority used the Arab League as just something to hang on its failures. The Arabs were sending, most of the Arab capitals were sending the Palestinian very pessimistic message, is to just accept what's on the table. And even if they want to surrender most of their rights, it's all right with the Arab League. That is the Arabs' position. But if we want to understand what's going on in here, if we go to the Camp David negotiation between Arafat and Barak, and then appointment of Mahmoud Abbas as Prime Minister in the government of Arafat, and then Abbas declares openly he doesn't believe in the Palestinian Intifada and it's done a lot of damage to the Palestinian, then he takes over the Palestinian Authority and Arafat dies poisoned, and what happened, he disarmed Fatah, is the major Palestinian political party, disarmed. So you are having a Palestinian Authority, have no strength, have no power whatsoever, and demanded of it now is the unification with Hamas to disarm Hamas in Gaza Strip. So then they disarm the Palestinian totally. What's all of this is about? The United States right now, the president himself is a very fragile, is 1 month he'll have no power because the election period's coming. The United States of America doesn't want to pressurize Israel to go back to the 1967 borders. Definitely, if it's cannot pressurize Israel for 2 months, a freeze of settlement. So it's in here we are seeing a new formula. If we read between the lines, the new formula is telling us the exact picture as follows. Oslo was about getting rid of the thorn in the side of Israel, which was Gaza. They got rid of Gaza. Now there is left the West Bank for the Zionists to swallow and to establish in it as much as they want. The proposal, if you allow me, of the new way of thinking in Likud party, the right wing, is to annex the West Bank, all of it, to the Israeli state, and then give sort of autonomous status to some of the Palestinians in 1948 and in the West Bank in there.
Dr. Shaath.
I agree.
I never thought I'd see Dr. Saeb Shaath and Mr. Richard Hellman agreeing on this show.
This is not the U.S. Congress. It's really not appropriate to try to do a filibuster. There are a number of statements that were inaccurate before that I'd like to correct. The allegation that these are disputed territories is really incorrect. We continually are hearing the Israeli talking points from Mr. Hellman. In reality, these are occupied territories. They are parts of them Israel has attempted to annex, but that is illegal under international law, under a number of provisions of international law. So in reality, these are occupied territories in which Israel is illegally changing the demographic character and adding its own citizens. All of this is completely illegal under international law. Much of the Israeli actions are illegal even according to U.S. law. But what we are seeing with these alleged negotiations or attempt for negotiations, once again, is that international policy in the Middle East, in the United States, is domestic policy, where we have a very powerful special interest, as Mr. Hellman knows, he's a part of it, the Israel lobby, that completely drives U.S. policies on this issue. So as a result, we see President Obama taking stands that are really no different from the Republicans, in which he continually pushes largely the Israeli position. Now, once again, there is an attempt to get some sort of direct talks. All of us, I would hope, do want peace. We want to see an end to the bloodshed. Once again, it is Israel that is refusing to take the steps necessary for such talks.
To talk about the Palestinian state right now. It's too late.
You're right.
Israel is supported by the EU, by the United States of America, and by the virgin of Arabic regimes, and Israel is doing what it wants in the West Bank. And the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, they don't believe they are the leadership of the PLO who fight for the Palestinian homeland. They act and behave like the opposition group of the Labour Israeli Party. in here, and they behave as an Israeli politicians in opposition to the Likud. That's all. So we are too late to talk about the establishing the Palestinian state in here. If we want to think this leadership is going to achieve this, this leadership don't want to upset the United States of America, Mr. Obama, in case the bloodline of money which is coming to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah will stop, and then his partners and his team who's leading in the West Bank will have no companies to run, no investment opportunities, and they cannot pay wages for their civil servants in the West Bank. That's the whole problem. I believe this man, negotiate, will surrender more and more and more, and it's time for the Palestinians right now and the Arabs to stop and to disassemble this PLO totally and establish a new umbrella group for the Palestinian who can fight and resist. It's now for the Palestinian to take matters in their hands.
Over to Ms. Weir. What we're seeing in this conversation, and what really is increasingly an opinion on the ground in the region, is that a two-state solution will not work. It doesn't matter what the politicians are saying. You look at the reports, you look at the figures. Most people on the ground don't believe that it will work. So how do you go forward from this point then? What is a viable, realistic solution?
Well, most people that are now working on this issue and knowledgeable about it in the United States, I do speak out for what I think the United States as a nation should and can do to bring peace. And really the first thing that will be done is the American population is now giving Israel at least $7 million per day of our tax money. This is interfering with the compromises that need to go forward, and especially the United States is in a financial crisis. We cannot afford to send this kind of money to a foreign government. What's happening is more and more people are saying it is time to stop enormous giveaway to Israel, at which time the Israeli leaders who understand that they do need to compromise how that land is shared will finally have a chance to negotiate with the Palestinian population, who have long recognized that need. Whether they will negotiate two states, but actually two real states, not what's on the table now, which is pockets of Bantustans without any real sovereignty at all, and a massive Israeli state. Likely one state with equal rights for all people, a secular state that gives equal rights to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, as Yasser Arafat both proposed decades ago at the United Nations. One state principled position, stronger chance for long-term peace.
Hellman's point of view here as well, in terms of viable solutions now. And is it the case now that Israeli interests are growing further apart from American national interests? And is it shooting itself in the foot, Israel, when it's taking these kind of stances?
I believe that Ms. Waters may have a good point, that I think it is, when she speaks of a secular, democratic state with freedom and liberty for all, that is the state of Israel today. It is called a Jewish state, but there's very little preference for Jews over Arabs and Christians. I lived in Jerusalem for 7 years.
That's just absurd. That is just absurd.
Even though I was a foreign worker, I voted for the mayor of Jerusalem, for Teddy Kollek, and I was only a foreign worker helping with environmental matters in Israel, and they let me vote for the mayor of Jerusalem. Now that's a high standard. That's a high standard of democracy, and the Arabs, Christians, and Jews all vote and have members of the Knesset, of the parliament,
white, blue-eyed democracy,
and ambassadors and ministers in the government. And anybody...
Dr. Shaath,
I beg you to listen to me. May I come in here, please? 1 second.
Go ahead.
The Palestinian people asking for justice. I, as a Palestinian myself, I ask for the right of return, which is guaranteed by the United Nations Resolution 194 for me. I want to go back to my land, which was stolen. I don't want a judge to sit from United States or from anywhere and tell me, for a day robber like Israel who robbed my country, to tell me I can share this with them or share that with them. I don't care what they're going to call it, democratic, secular, any state, but I want the right of return for all the Palestinians to go back to their homeland. Enough for 8 or 9 million Palestinian refugees around the world. Even in Arabic countries, they lack the basic human rights. They're not allowed to work. Look at Lebanon for an example. We're asking for us as Palestinians to go back to our country, to divide this between here and Bundestan here on there. That is the basic question. A humanitarian and justice have to be applied in here.
I'm afraid we're going to have to end with, to thank all our guests tonight of Press TV's news analysis, but to author and Middle East affairs expert Dr. Saeb Shaath in Belfast, and to President of the Middle East Research Centre Richard Hellman in Washington, and Executive Director of If Americans Knew and the President of the Council for National Interest Alison Weir in Chicago. I'd like to thank all three